When my daughter stopped breathing in the emergency room, the night nurse did something no one else dared to do. She pushed the doctor aside, grabbed a pair of medical scissors, and cut a clean line straight into my little girl's throat. Her hands didn't shake, not once. But that's not what made me freeze. It was the scar running down her wrist, a jagged line I'd seen before, 7 years ago, in the mountains of Afghanistan. I'd bandaged that exact wound on a dying soldier. A woman who'd looked me in the eyes and whispered her last words before the second explosion took everything. She died in my arms that night. So why was she standing here? The rain came down like a punishment over Seattle that November night. It hammered against the windshield of Callum Reeves' old pickup truck, turning the road into a river of reflected taillights. In the back seat, his 7-year-old daughter, Wren, was making a sound he'd never heard before. A wet, desperate wheeze that cut through the noise of the storm like a knife through silk. Callum glanced in the rearview mirror. His daughter's lips were turning blue. 3 years ago, he'd watched his wife die in a hospital bed. The memory lived in his bones like a splinter that wouldn't come out. He'd been a paramedic then, one of the best in the city. He'd saved hundreds of strangers. But when Meredith's heart stopped, when the machines screamed and the doctors shook their heads, he couldn't do a single thing to bring her back. He'd quit the next day, traded his uniform for a toolbox, became a plumber so he could be home when Wren got off the school bus, so he could make her dinner and braid her hair and pretend that he wasn't drowning in grief every single day. Now his daughter was suffocating in his back seat, and he was driving through a monsoon at 80 miles an hour, praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. St. Jude's Memorial Hospital appeared through the rain like a lighthouse. Callum didn't bother parking properly. He left the truck at the emergency entrance, scooped Wren into his arms, and ran. The emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell. Callum shouted for help, his voice cracking, his daughter limp against his chest. They took her from him, wheeled her into a trauma bay. A doctor appeared, Dr. Bennett Halloway according to his badge. He was tall, gray-haired, distinguished-looking, but Callum noticed the tremor in his hands, the slight glaze over his eyes, the way he fumbled with the intubation equipment. Callum had been around enough medical professionals to recognize the signs. The man had been drinking. Wren's oxygen levels were dropping. 82%, 78, 72. The young nurse beside Halloway, her badge read Sarah, was panicking, calling out numbers that sounded like a countdown to death. Callum stepped forward. He'd done this procedure 100 times in the field. He could save his own daughter. But Halloway shoved him back. "Sir, you need to stay out of the way." The number hit 65. Wren stopped moving. And then she appeared. Callum didn't see where she came from. One moment the doorway was empty, and the next moment a woman was standing there. Small, mousy brown hair pulled back in a messy bun. Shoulders hunched like she was trying to disappear into the walls. She moved past Callum without a sound, pushed Halloway aside with a single motion. Not aggressive, but absolutely final. The drunk doctor stumbled backward, too shocked to protest. The woman assessed the situation in less than 2 seconds, looked at Wren's swollen throat, at the failed intubation attempts, at the monitors screaming their warnings. Then she picked up a pair of trauma scissors. Callum's medical training told him what was coming. A cricothyrotomy, an emergency surgical airway, was a procedure of last resort, dangerous, invasive, in the wrong hands, fatal. But this woman's hands weren't wrong. She located the cricothyroid membrane by touch alone, made a single incision, clean, precise, exactly 1.5 centimeters, inserted a small breathing tube through the opening. 3 seconds. The whole thing took 3 seconds. Wren gasped, a horrible, beautiful, rattling sound that meant she was alive. The oxygen numbers began to climb. 70, 75, 82, 90. Sarah let out a sob of relief. Halloway stood frozen, his face pale with the realization of how close they'd come to disaster. And the woman who had just performed a miracle was already stepping back, fading toward the edges of the room like she'd never been there at all. That's when Callum saw it. Her sleeve had ridden up during the procedure, revealing her forearm. There, running from her wrist to her elbow, was a scar. Thick, ragged. Not the neat line of surgery, but the chaotic map of shrapnel wounds. He knew that scar. He'd made the bandage that had tried to hold it together 7 years ago in a valley on the other side of the world. The woman's name had been Vance, Staff Sergeant Elena Vance. They'd called her Ghost because of how she moved. Silent, invisible, deadly when she needed to be. She'd led a cultural support team attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment. Her job was to move through Afghan villages, build relationships with local women, gather intelligence that male soldiers couldn't access. She was fluent in Pashto, trained in combat medicine, and possessed an instinct for danger that had saved lives more times than anyone could count. And on one terrible night in the Pesh Valley, she'd made a decision that haunted Callum ever since. He'd been the medic on duty, 29 years old, confident in his skills, certain he could handle anything the war threw at him. When Ghost Team came in with casualties, he'd worked on her for 20 minutes, pressed gauze against the wound that was now a scar on her arm. Listened to her breathing grow shallow. She'd looked up at him with eyes that refused to show fear. "Don't let me die a coward," she'd whispered. Then the second bomb hit. Callum woke up in a field hospital 3 weeks later with a concussion and a piece of shrapnel in his shoulder. They told him Ghost was dead. KIA, killed in action. He'd carried her memory like a stone in his chest for 7 years. The soldier he couldn't save. The last words he couldn't fulfill. Now she was standing in front of him, alive, wearing nurse's scrubs and checking his daughter's vital signs. Callum reached out and grabbed her wrist. She flinched, a violent full-body reaction, and tried to pull away. He held firm, turned her arm over, looked at the scar he'd tried so hard to heal 7 years ago. Then he looked at her face. She was older now, thinner. The fire that had burned in her eyes back in Afghanistan had been replaced by something flat and guarded. But it was her. He was certain. "You're Ghost," he whispered. "You're the one who saved my squad that night. You're the one I was holding when the bomb went off." The woman's face went white. "You have the wrong person." She pulled free and walked away, disappearing through a door marked "Staff Only." But Callum had seen her shoulders trembling, and he wasn't going to let this go. Ren spent 3 nights in the hospital. The emergency airway was replaced with a proper tracheostomy, then removed entirely once her swelling went down. The allergic reaction that had nearly killed her was traced to a new medication, a rare sensitivity that would be carefully documented in her medical records forever. Callum stayed by her bedside every moment he could, but his mind kept drifting to the night nurse. Her hospital badge confirmed her name, Elena Vance. The staff called her the Shadow. She worked exclusively night shifts, kept to herself, and spoke so quietly that people often forgot she was in the room. She was invisible by design. Callum understood that kind of invisibility. It was the armor of people who had seen too much, people who had done things they couldn't forget, people who were hiding from the world, from themselves, from something they couldn't outrun. On the second night, he found himself walking the halls at 2 a.m. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ren's blue lips, heard that terrible wheezing sound. He found Elena at the nurse's station, alone, typing notes into a computer. The blue light from the screen reflected in her dark, unblinking eyes. She saw him coming and tensed, but didn't run. Callum sat down in the chair across from her. He didn't speak, just waited. The silence stretched between them for a long moment. Finally, Elena looked up. "What do you want?" "Nothing," Callum said. "I just wanted you to know something." She waited, her expression carefully blank. "I've carried guilt for 7 years," he said. "I was the medic that night. My job was to keep people alive. And I spent all this time believing I'd failed you, that you died because I wasn't fast enough, wasn't skilled enough, wasn't good enough." Elena's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. "Seeing you alive," Callum continued, his voice rough, "it's a gift I never expected. I don't need anything from you. I just needed you to know that." He stood to leave. "The staff here calls me a shadow," Elena said quietly, almost to herself. "They look right through me." Callum turned back. "But you see me." It wasn't a question. "I see you," he agreed. "I see you check on Mr. Patterson in room 407 every 2 hours. Even though he's not on your rounds. I see you bring extra blankets to the elderly woman in 403 because she's always cold. I see you sit with the patients who wake up scared in the middle of the night, holding their hands until they fall back asleep. Elena's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. You're not invisible, Elena. You're just hiding. He paused, and I'd like to understand why. He left her with that question hanging in the air between them. On the third night, Ren did something unexpected. Elena came into the room at 2 a.m. to check vitals, moving with her usual silent efficiency. She thought the little girl was asleep, but Ren was watching her with bright, curious eyes. You're the one who saved me, Ren said. It wasn't a question. Elena froze mid-motion. I just did my job, she said after a moment. Daddy said you cut my throat so I could breathe. That's not a regular nurse thing. That's a superhero thing. Elena didn't know how to respond. It had been 7 years since she'd had a real conversation with anyone, let alone a child. You should sleep, she said finally. I can't. I keep thinking about Mommy. Elena hesitated. Professional distance. That was what she was supposed to maintain. Don't get involved. Don't form connections. Stay invisible. But something in the little girl's voice cracked through her defenses. Your mommy? Elena asked softly, sitting down on the edge of the bed. She's in heaven. She died 3 years ago. Ren said it matter-of-factly, with the practiced acceptance of a child who had learned to live with loss. Daddy says she's watching me from up there. Do you believe that? Ren thought about it seriously. Yeah, because if Mommy wasn't watching, who sent you to save me? Elena felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the wall she'd built so carefully. The next night, Ren gave her a drawing. It showed a woman in armor standing before a fallen dragon. Fire and smoke swirled around the scene, but the armored figure stood tall, victorious. A sword hung at her side. Her cape billowed in an imaginary wind, but her face was sad. That's you, Ren explained, pointing. You're the princess who already beat the dragon. Elena stared at the drawing. The detail was remarkable for a 7-year-old. The colors were vivid. But it was the expression on the princess's face that held her attention. Why does she look sad? Ren tilted her head, considering the question with the gravity of a tiny philosopher. Because fighting dragons is lonely, she said finally. And when you win, but there's nobody there to hug you after, that's the saddest kind of winning. Elena's throat closed completely. She couldn't speak. But it's okay, Ren added, patting Elena's hand with small warm fingers. Because now you have us, and we give really good hugs. For the first time in 7 years, Elena Vance cried. Not from grief, not from guilt, not from the memories that haunted her every night, from being seen. On the 4th night, Elena found Callum on the hospital roof. He discovered the access door by accident while exploring during one of his sleepless wanderings. The roof offered a view of Seattle's skyline, glittering through the perpetual mist, in a silence that felt almost sacred. Elena sat down beside him without invitation. For a long time, neither spoke. The city hummed below them. The rain had finally stopped, leaving everything washed clean. Then Elena began to talk. 7 years ago, Pesh Valley. My team was moving back to base. Her voice was flat, clinical, like she was reading from an after-action report. There were 2 routes. Path A went through the valley, shorter, easier terrain. Path B went over the ridge, longer, harder, more exposed. Callum remembered. He'd been with the support unit that night, waiting for her team to return. I had a feeling, Elena continued. No intelligence, no evidence, just a gut instinct that Path A was wrong. So I ordered the team to take Path B. And there was an IED on Path B. Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. The explosion killed 3 of my people. Sergeant David Jackson, Corporal Maria Rivera, Private First Class Thomas Kowalski. I can still see their faces when I close my eyes. I can still hear them laughing at a joke Jackson told 10 minutes before they died. Her hands were trembling in her lap. I woke up in the hospital a month later. They said I was a hero, said my decisions saved lives. She laughed in a bitter, hollow sound. They wanted to give me a medal. I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. You made a choice, Callum said carefully. In combat, sometimes that's all you can do. I made the wrong choice. 3 people died because I trusted my gut instead of following protocol. I killed them. No. Callum's voice was firm. You didn't. Elena looked at him sharply. I read the classified after-action report 2 years later, he said. I requested it because I couldn't stop thinking about that night. About you. He took a breath. Path A, the route you didn't take, had 15 Taliban fighters waiting in ambush. They had RPGs, machine guns, and complete concealment. If your team had gone that way, everyone would have died. Not 3 people. Everyone. The IED on Path B was planted by someone with inside information. Someone who knew your team's movements. Elena stared at him. What? Your instinct wasn't wrong. It saved 12 lives that night, including mine. I was in the QRF that would have been sent to rescue you. If your entire team had been wiped out in an ambush, we would have walked into the same trap. Elena shook her head, unable to process what she was hearing. That's not... No one told me. Because the investigation was classified, and because you disappeared before anyone could tell you the truth. Silence fell between them. I let them declare me dead, Elena finally said. I couldn't face the families. Couldn't accept their gratitude when I felt like a murderer. So I vanished. Started over. Became no one. You've been punishing yourself for 7 years, Callum said, for a crime you didn't commit. How am I supposed to just accept that? I don't know. He reached over and took her hand. She flinched but didn't pull away. But maybe you don't have to figure it out alone. They sat there until the sun began to lighten the eastern sky. 2 broken people holding on to each other like lifelines. Callum couldn't let the investigation drop. Something about Elena's story didn't add up. An IED on Path B. Ambush on Path A. Someone had known exactly where her team would be, whichever route they took. He started digging, called old contacts from his military days. Most of them had moved on. Private security, government jobs, quiet lives far from the memories of war. But one of them, a woman named Rodriguez, who now worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, agreed to help. What she sent him changed everything. The IED that killed Jackson, Rivera, and Kowalski hadn't been a standard Taliban device. It was American-made, C4 explosive with a military-grade detonator, lost from the inventory of a CIA contractor named Silas Thorne. Thorne had been selling intelligence to the enemy for years. Patrol routes, base locations, names of informants. He'd gotten rich off American blood while soldiers died for his profit. But that wasn't the worst part. Attached to the file was a list of related incidents, deaths and disappearances connected to Thorne's activities. One entry stopped Callum's heart. March 15th, 3 years ago. Meredith Reeves, journalist, Seattle Tribune. Killed in a single-car accident while investigating war crimes, allegations against private military contractors. Case closed. No charges filed. His wife. Meredith hadn't been killed by a drunk driver or a wet road or bad luck. She'd been murdered by the same man who had planted the bomb that nearly killed Elena. Callum read the entry again and again, each time feeling the ground shift further beneath his feet. For 3 years, he'd told himself it was fate, an accident, a terrible random tragedy that had stolen his wife and left his daughter without a mother. But it wasn't random. Meredith had gotten too close to the truth, and someone had silenced her permanently. The same monster who had nearly killed Elena, the same monster who had profited from American deaths for years. Callum's hands were shaking as he scrolled to the final page of the file. Subject: Vance Elena, Staff Sergeant, believed KIA. Status: confirmed alive. Currently employed at St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, Seattle, Washington. Threat assessment: high. Only surviving witness to Thorne's involvement in Pesh Valley incident. Recommendation: eliminate. The timestamp on the document was 6 months ago. Thorne knew Elena was alive. He'd been watching her, planning. And tonight, Callum looked at the date. Tonight was when Thorne had scheduled his resolution. The clock read 11:47 p.m. Elena was alone at the hospital. Callum grabbed his keys and ran. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor of St. Jude's Memorial Hospital. Silas Thorne stepped out. He was a big man, 6'4", 250 pounds of muscle wrapped in a rain-soaked trench coat. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had killed before and expected to kill again. In his hands was an AR-15 with a modified short barrel and holographic sight. On his hip, a 1911 pistol. In his boot, a combat knife. This wasn't a desperate man with a grudge. This was a professional with a plan. Elena heard the sound from 3 rooms away, the distinctive metallic clack of a rifle bolt being released. It was a sound that didn't belong in a hospital, a sound that transported her instantly back to a valley on the other side of the world. She was in the medication room preparing the 2 a.m. rounds. Through the small window in the door, she could see Thorne moving down the corridor toward the nurse's station. The old Elena, the ghost who had spent 7 years running from her past, would have found the fire exit and disappeared into the night. That had been her survival strategy. Stay invisible. Stay hidden. Let someone else handle the problem. But there were 18 people on this floor who couldn't run. Patients recovering from surgery, connected to machines, and IV's nurses who had never faced anything more dangerous than a difficult family member. Ren's drawing flashed through her mind. The princess who had beaten the dragon. The sad face because she was alone. She wasn't alone anymore. Elena closed her eyes, took one deep breath, and let the ranger come back. Thorne moved through the ward with methodical efficiency. He gathered the staff at gunpoint, Sarah, 2 other nurses, and Dr. Holloway, who had the terrible luck of pulling a double shift. He sealed the exits, disabled the security cameras. He had a cover story ready, a grieving husband seeking revenge on the drunk doctor who had let his wife die. It would explain the violence, provide a narrative for the investigation, and disguise the real purpose of his visit. His real target was Elena Vance, the only witness who could connect him to the Pesh Valley bombing, the only loose end in decades of careful criminal enterprise. But Elena wasn't where she was supposed to be. Thorne swept the hallway with his rifle, checking corners, searching for the woman he'd come to eliminate. The schedule said she was working tonight. The reconnaissance said she was always here at this hour. Then he spotted her near the supply closet. She was hunched over, trembling visibly, her hands raised in surrender. Tears streamed down her face. She looked exactly like what her personnel file said she was. A traumatized veteran who had cracked under pressure, a shadow of her former self. Thorne didn't see a threat. He saw a victim. "Get over here," he ordered, gesturing with the rifle. "Now!" Elena complied, stumbling over her own feet as she walked, a calculated move that reinforced his assessment. She joined the other hostages at the nurse's station, her whole body shaking with apparent terror. Thorne threw a bundle of zip ties at her. "Tie them up, hands behind their backs. If you leave them loose, I start shooting." Elena picked up the zip ties with trembling fingers. She moved to Dr. Holloway first. As she secured his wrists, she leaned close to his ear. "When the lights go out," she whispered, her voice suddenly devoid of any fear, "drop to the floor and cover your head. Don't move until I say clear." Holloway's eyes went wide, but he had enough sense not to react visibly. Elena moved to Sarah, then the other nurses. Each time she left just enough slack in the bonds for them to escape, but tight enough to fool a casual inspection. Then she returned to face Thorne. She was 10 feet away from him now, close enough to see that his rifle's safety was off, close enough to see the knife handle protruding from his boot, close enough to calculate angles and distances and the precise sequence of movements that would need to happen in the next few seconds. Thorne glanced toward the window, checking for police lights. That glance gave Elena a quarter of a second. She moved, not running. Running triggers the chase response. She exploded forward in a low crouch, covering the distance between them faster than his reflexes could process. Thorne heard her coming. He was well-trained, experienced. He swung the rifle around, finger tightening on the trigger. The shot went high. The bullet shattered a fluorescent light fixture, showering the hallway with sparks and debris. But Elena was already inside his guard. Her left hand jammed upward against the rifle's handguard, forcing the muzzle toward the ceiling. Her right hand held the trauma scissors she'd palmed from the medication room. She drove the scissors into the rifle's ejection port and twisted with all her strength. Metal screamed against metal. The bolt carrier seized completely. The rifle was now useless. Thorne roared in fury and backhanded her across the face. The blow lifted her off her feet and sent her sliding across the tile floor. She tasted blood, her vision blurred, but she was already rolling, already moving. because stillness meant death. Thorne dropped the jammed rifle and reached for his pistol. Elena grabbed a wheeled IV stand and shoved it into his legs. He stumbled. The pistol discharged, but the shot went wide, burying itself in the wall. Behind them, the hostages were running for the fire exit, their loosened bonds falling away as they moved. Good. Fewer civilians in the kill zone. Thorne recovered and leveled the pistol at Elena's chest. She was out of weapons, out of tricks, out of time. So she charged him. They collided like two forces of nature, meeting head-on. Elena was smaller and lighter, but she was trained in close-quarters combat. Thorne was bigger and stronger, but he was fighting with rage instead of discipline. She went for the pistol, got both hands on his wrist, twisted with everything she had. The gun fired again, into the ceiling, and then clattered to the floor, spinning away into the shadows. Thorne got his hands around her throat and squeezed. Elena's vision began to tunnel. Black spots danced in her eyes. Her body screamed for oxygen. The animal part of her brain wanted to panic, to claw at his hands, to thrash uselessly until she died. But the soldier part of her brain was still calculating. She stopped struggling, brought her knees up to her chest, wedged them between her body and his. Then she extended her legs with explosive force, driving her heels into his solar plexus. The grip broke. Thorne staggered backward, gasping for air. Elena dropped to the floor, sucking in oxygen. Her throat felt like it had been crushed by a vice, but she was alive, and the fight wasn't over. Thorne pulled the combat knife from his boot. 8 inches of serrated steel. "I've waited 7 years for this," he said, his voice rough. "You should have stayed dead." The fight that followed was brutal and desperate. Thorne was trained, dangerous, and fighting without rules. He knew how to use a knife, and he wasn't interested in intimidation. He was going for killing blows. Elena took a shallow cut across her stomach, another across her arm. The blood made the floor slick beneath her feet. But she was Ghost. She'd survived ambushes in the Hindu Kush, firefights in villages with no backup, explosions that should have killed her. She wasn't going to die in a hospital hallway. She caught his knife hand on a downward strike, twisted, heard the satisfying crack of bone as his wrist gave way. Thorne screamed and dropped the blade. Elena swept his legs, mounted him, wrapped her legs around his throat in a triangle choke. "Go to sleep," she hissed through gritted teeth. He thrashed, clawed at her legs, tried to stand, lifting her completely off the ground with the strength of pure rage and desperation. She held on, squeezed until her muscles screamed, squeezed until his movements slowed, squeezed until his body finally went limp. She held the choke for another 10 seconds, then another 10. Only when she was absolutely certain did she release him. She collapsed on the floor beside his unconscious body, staring at the ceiling, gasping for breath. That's when she smelled the smoke. During their fight, Thorne had kicked over a shelf of medical supplies. Bottles of ethanol, isopropyl alcohol, and surgical-grade solvents had shattered across the floor. A severed electrical wire, damaged by one of the gunshots, sparked once, twice, 3 times. The third spark found the pool of flammable liquid. The fire spread faster than should have been possible, racing through the old building's infrastructure like it had a personal vendetta. Elena pulled herself upright. Her body was a catalog of injuries. Bruised throat, cracked ribs, knife wounds still seeping blood. But pain was just information. Information could be processed later. Right now, 18 people still needed to get out of this building. She zip-tied Thorne's unconscious body to a heavy pipe in the stairwell. Let the fire department find him. Then she went back into the flames. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Elena's life. She pulled patients from their beds one at a time, dragged them on bed sheets, pushed wheelchairs through smoke-filled corridors, created a human chain of survivors in the center of the hallway, the one section that hadn't yet been consumed. 12 patients. 12 people who couldn't save themselves. Her lungs burned with every breath. Her eyes streamed from the smoke. Her body begged her to stop, to find an exit, to save herself. She didn't stop. But there was one more. Room 410. Leo Martinez, 8 years old, recovering from a ruptured spleen. The hallway leading to his room was a solid wall of fire. Elena looked at the flames, looked at the door beyond them. She grabbed a fire extinguisher, doused herself with the chemical spray, took the deepest breath she could manage, and ran straight through. The heat was beyond anything she'd experienced. It seared her skin, scorched her lungs, threatened to cook her alive. But she made it through. Leo was hiding under his bed, crying, too terrified to move. "Hey," Elena said, her voice rough from smoke. "Hey, it's okay. I'm here to get you out." "I'm scared," the boy sobbed. "I know. Me too." She pulled him into her arms. "But I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I promise." She wrapped him in wet blankets, shielded his face against her chest, and ran back through the fire. Callum arrived with the SWAT team to find the fourth floor fully engulfed. Firefighters were battling the blaze from ladder trucks, but the wind in the old building were working against them. He pushed through the perimeter, ignoring the officers trying to hold him back. The bucket of the ladder truck was descending. Inside was a firefighter holding a small boy wrapped in wet blankets. Leo, safe. But behind them, visible through the smoke-filled window of the fourth floor, a figure was still moving. Elena. She was carrying someone, an elderly woman in a hospital gown, Mrs. Gladys Patterson, 82 years old, recovering from hip surgery, the last patient on the floor. Callum watched as Elena reached the window. The fire was right behind her. The floor was collapsing. The ladder truck was still repositioning, too far away to reach her in time. Elena set Mrs. Patterson down carefully, pointing toward the firefighters below. Then she climbed onto the windowsill. Callum's heart stopped. She wasn't going to jump for the ladder. She was going to jump for the drainage pipe, 3 feet to the left of the window. It was an impossible distance. The pipe was wet with rain. The fall was 4 stories. But Elena didn't hesitate. She jumped. Her hands caught the pipe. Her shoulder wrenched with an audible pop, dislocated from the impact. But she held on, slid down 1 story, caught a bracket, held. The ladder truck swung into position beneath her. She let go. Callum caught her as she fell into the bucket. For a moment, they just looked at each other, both covered in soot and blood, both breathing hard, both alive. "Took you long enough," Elena whispered. Then she passed out in his arms. The ladder truck swung back to the 4th floor. 30 seconds later, they pulled Mrs. Patterson to safety. Everyone made it out. Every single person. The arrest happened in full view of 6 news cameras. Silas Thorne, burned, beaten, zip-tied to a pipe in a hospital stairwell, was dragged out by FBI agents who had been building a case against him for 2 years. The evidence Callum had uncovered provided the final pieces they needed. "Silas Thorne," the lead agent announced, loud enough for every microphone to catch, "you are under arrest for the murders of Sergeant David Jackson, Corporal Maria Rivera, Private First Class Thomas Kowalski, and journalist Meredith Reeves. You are also charged with treason, espionage, and domestic terrorism." Thorne's face contorted with rage. "You can't prove anything. We already have." The agent held up a flash drive. "Your own records, your own communications, every transaction, every payment, every death you profited from, it's all here." Callum watched from the ambulance as the man who had killed his wife was shoved into an armored vehicle. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel satisfaction. He felt release. 3 years of unanswered questions. 3 years of wondering why fate had taken Meredith from him. Now he knew the truth, and the man responsible would spend the rest of his life in prison. Meredith could finally rest, and maybe so could he. Elena woke up in the ICU 12 hours later. 3 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, 2nd-degree burns across her back, multiple lacerations requiring stitches. She'd had worse. Callum was asleep in the chair beside her bed, his hand still loosely holding hers. And curled up on the small sofa beneath the window was Wren, clutching the drawing of the princess who had defeated the dragon. Elena watched them sleep, this man and this child who had somehow become her family, and felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Peace. When Callum stirred and saw her awake, his face broke into a smile that made him look 10 years younger. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey, you scared the hell out of me." "I scared the hell out of myself." He laughed, a quiet, exhausted sound. and squeezed her hand. She wouldn't leave, Callum said, nodding toward Wren. Threw an absolute fit when I tried to take her home. Said Mama Elena needed her. Elena's breath caught. Mama Elena? She started calling you that yesterday. I didn't teach her. He paused. Is that okay? Elena looked at the sleeping child, at the drawing clutched in her small hands, at the man who had looked at all her broken pieces and seen someone worth loving. It's more than okay, she whispered. Wren stirred then, as if sensing she was being discussed. Her eyes fluttered open, and when she saw Elena awake, she scrambled off the sofa and climbed carefully onto the hospital bed. Mama Elena, you're awake. Elena felt tears pricking at her eyes. I'm awake, sweetheart. Does it still hurt? Wren's face was serious, concerned. Daddy says hugs make things hurt less. Can I give you a hug? Yes, Elena said, her voice cracking. Yes, I would love a hug. Wren wrapped her small arms around Elena's neck with careful gentleness. Mama Elena, she said, pulling back after a moment, her expression suddenly solemn in that way only children can manage. I learned something at school. See, what did you learn? About broken things. When a cup breaks, most people throw it away. But in Japan, they fix it with gold. The cracks become the prettiest part. She touched Elena's bandaged arm softly. You have lots of cracks, but that just means you need lots of gold. Elena felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking but releasing. Years of guilt, years of hiding, years of believing she didn't deserve to heal. Kintsugi, Callum said softly. It's called kintsugi. Yeah, that, Wren nodded confidently. The broken parts make it more special, not less. That's what my teacher said. Elena pulled the little girl close again, burying her face in Wren's hair so no one would see her crying. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing my cracks. That's easy, Wren said matter-of-factly. That's what families do. Later, after Wren had fallen back asleep, Callum told Elena about Meredith. She was investigating Thorne, he said, his voice rough, building a case that would have exposed everything. And she was writing about you. Elena looked at him sharply. Me? About what happened in the Pesh Valley. She believed you were a hero, even when nobody knew you were still alive. She was going to tell your story. She died trying to expose him, trying to clear my name. Elena closed her eyes. And I didn't even know she existed. She would have loved you, Callum said. She would have been so proud that you saved Wren, that you saved all those people last night. I wish I could have met her. In a way you did. Her investigation led me to you. Her courage gave us the evidence to bring Thorne down. She's the reason we're sitting here right now. He lifted Elena's hand to his lips and kissed it gently. She's still saving people, even now. Elena thought about that, about a woman she'd never met, whose work had rippled forward through time to touch her life, about the strange connections that link people together across years and miles and circumstances. I spent 7 years believing I didn't deserve to live, she said finally, that I should have died in that valley with the others. And now? She looked at Wren, sleeping peacefully on the sofa, at Callum, whose eyes held no judgment, only love. Now I think maybe I was saved for a reason. Maybe we all were. 1 year later, the 4th floor of St. Jude's Memorial Hospital had been completely rebuilt. New walls, new equipment, new memories to replace the old ones. Elena stood at the nurse's station, reviewing the night's assignments. Her badge read, Elena Vance Reeves, RN, Charge Nurse. The wedding ring on her finger, simple white gold, chosen by Wren, caught the light as she typed. The elevator dinged. Callum stepped out with Wren on his shoulders, both of them grinning like they were sharing a secret. Mama, we brought dinner, Wren announced, waving a takeout bag triumphantly. Daddy said you forget to eat when you're working, so we're here to make sure you don't turn into a skeleton. Elena laughed, a sound that still surprised her sometimes, even after a year of relearning how to make it. I have 2 more hours on my shift, little one. That's okay, we'll wait. Wren squirmed down from Callum's shoulders and produced a new drawing from her backpack. Look what I made. The picture showed 3 stick figures standing in front of a house with a red door. Above them, a 4th figure with wings watched from a fluffy cloud, smiling. That's us, Wren explained, pointing to each figure in turn. That's Daddy, that's me, and that's you, Mama Elena. And that's Mommy Meredith watching from heaven. She's smiling because she's happy we found you. Elena's throat tightened. She knelt down to hug her daughter. Her daughter, she could think of Ren that way now, without feeling like an imposter. It's beautiful, she said. I'll put it on the fridge right next to the Dragon Princess. Callum crouched beside them, wrapping his arms around both of them. I love you, he said, to Elena, to Ren, to the miracle of their unlikely family. I love you too, Elena whispered back, and she meant it, without reservation, without guilt, without the weight of ghosts. Later that night, after Callum and Ren had gone home, Elena walked the quiet halls of the rebuilt fourth floor. She checked on each room, adjusted blankets, held hands that reached out in the darkness, sat with patients who woke up scared and couldn't fall back asleep. The newspapers had called her the ghost nurse, the ranger who came back from the dead. But Elena didn't think about headlines or medals or the interviews she'd politely declined. She thought about a little girl who believed broken things could be made beautiful with gold. She thought about a man who had looked at her scars and seen someone worth loving. She thought about a journalist named Meredith who had died seeking truth and whose courage had rippled forward through time to save them all. The world was full of darkness. Elena knew that better than most. She'd lived in that darkness for 7 years, believing she didn't deserve the light. But she'd learned something important this year. Even the most broken vessels could hold love again. Even the deepest wounds could heal. And even in the darkest nights, there were people who needed someone to sit beside them and hold their hand until morning came. Elena Vance Reeves walked the halls of St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, no longer a ghost, no longer hiding, no longer alone. She was exactly where she was supposed to be,